Bus smelled like road dust and somebody's leftover fast food. Cal Merritt sat in the second-to-last row because that was where he always sat, back against the wall, full view of the aisle, nobody behind him. 15 years out of the Army, and he still could not make himself sit any other way. Sarge lay across his boots. The dog was too big for the space between the seats. He always had been. But the driver had looked at Sarge once, looked at Cal once, and said nothing. People usually didn't. There was something about the combination, the man who didn't quite fit into civilian clothes even when he was wearing them, and the German shepherd who watched every person who moved through the aisle with the focused patience of something that had once been trained to make decisions faster than humans could think. Outside the window, North Carolina unrolled itself in shades of green and gray. October had already started pulling color from the trees. The bus crossed a bridge over a river that was running low, and Cal watched the water without really seeing it. He had a folded piece of paper in his inside jacket pocket. He had read it so many times the creases were starting to soften. He knew what it said. He did not need to read it again. But his hand went to it anyway, the way a man's tongue finds a sore tooth, not to fix anything, just to confirm it's still there. The letter was from a law office in Wilkesboro, North Carolina. 3 paragraphs. The important part was in the second one. It is our professional duty to inform you that Mr. Daniel Ray Pruitt, age 51, passed away on March 4th of this year following a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. In accordance with his final will and testament, Mr. Pruitt has bequeathed his sole remaining asset, a stone mill property located at Rural Route 7, Wilkes County, North Carolina, to Mr. Calvin James Merritt. Mr. Pruitt's accompanying note reads, "For Cal, he'll know what to do with it, and tell him to bring the dog." Cal had read those last 6 words more times than the rest of the letter combined. Tell him to bring the dog. As if Danny had known. As if he had sat in whatever room he spent his last months in, and known with complete certainty that Sarge would still be alive, that Cal would still have him, that 15 years would not have changed that particular arrangement between the two of them. The bus began to slow. A recorded voice announced Wilkesboro. Sarge lifted his head, not toward the front of the bus where the announcement had come from. Sideways, ears forward, one slightly higher than the other, the way they went when he was picking up something specific out of the general noise of the world. He turned his muzzle toward the window. The silver around his jaw caught the afternoon light. "Yeah," Cal said quietly. "We're here." He did not say anything else. There was nothing else to say. He picked up his bag, one bag, same as it had been for 3 years, and followed Sarge down the aisle and off the bus. The town of Wilkesboro was the kind of place that had been waiting a long time for something that hadn't arrived yet. Main Street had a diner, a hardware store, a pharmacy with a hand-lettered sign in the window, and 3 empty storefronts with brown paper taped inside the glass. The mountains were visible from the end of every block, close enough to feel like walls. Cal stood on the sidewalk outside the bus station and let his eyes adjust. Sarge sat beside him and did not look at the town. He looked at Cal. "I don't know either," Cal said. He found a payphone, still working, which surprised him, and called the law office number from the letter. The lawyer's assistant gave him directions to the property. 40 minutes on foot, she said, or he could wait for someone to pick him up. Cal said he'd walk. He always walked when he could. Moving was easier than staying still. They had gone about a mile when the flashback came. It always started the same way, not with images, but with sound, the specific frequency of a military radio channel when there was nobody transmitting on it. Static that was not quite static. A frequency that felt like holding your breath. November 14th, 2009. He had given the order to pull back. The right order. The only order that kept 6 men alive when the ambush came from 3 directions at once. He had run the numbers in a fraction of a second, the way Rangers were trained to do, calculated lives against terrain, against ammunition, and he had made the call, and Danny had said, "Copy that, Ranger." in that flat professional voice he used when he was already moving, already executing, already somewhere ahead of the situation. And then the radio went quiet on Danny's frequency. Not the sound of a firefight, not anything dramatic, just quiet. The particular quiet that a channel makes when the person transmitting on it is no longer able to transmit. Cal had stayed on that frequency for 4 hours, listening to nothing, waiting for a voice that did not come back. Sarge pressed his flank against Cal's leg. Not hard, not urgently, just present. 90 pounds of old dog leaning into him with the steady weight of something that had been doing this for a long time and intended to keep doing it. Cal felt the contact through his jeans. Real, specific. Here, the road was in front of him. October light on asphalt, mountains in the distance. He kept walking. The lawyer's office was a converted house on a side street near the county courthouse. A woman in her 60s met him at the door. Diane Whitfield, the assistant he'd spoken to on the phone. She looked at Sarge with the careful expression of someone deciding whether to be nervous, then apparently decided against it. She handed Cal an envelope. Inside, a property deed, a hand-drawn map, and a single key on a plain metal ring. Mr. Pruitt was very specific, she said. He wanted you to have the key personally. He said you'd understand why. Cal turned the key over in his hand. Standard padlock key, worn smooth at the bow. Danny had handled this key. His fingers had been on this metal. "Did you know him?" Cal asked. "A little. He came in twice a year to pay the property taxes. Always on time, always cash." She paused. "He didn't talk much, but he asked about you. Every time he came in, he asked if we'd been able to reach you yet." Cal looked up from the key. "He asked us to find you 3 years ago," she said. "We had some difficulty locating a current address." 3 years. Danny had been trying to find him for 3 years, and Cal had been living out of a truck, moving between towns, staying off anything that would put him in a database. "He passed before we located you," she said. "I'm sorry." Cal put the key in his pocket beside the letter. "Thank you," he said. It was all he had. Outside, Sarge was waiting on the bottom step, muzzle tilted toward the northwest, toward wherever rural Route 7 was. The afternoon light was starting to angle low and golden through the trees, the kind of light that made everything look like it was about to mean something. Cal unfolded the map. "Come on," he said. Sarge stepped off the bottom step and walked north without waiting to be told twice. Ruth Abernathy's store was the kind of place that had not changed its layout in 40 years and did not intend to. 4 aisles, wood floors worn pale in the center where people walked, a coffee machine on the counter that had been making the same coffee since 1987. A bell above the door announced Cal and Sarge with a sound like something small and certain. The woman behind the counter was 71 years old and looked like she had heard every story the county had to offer and filed them away somewhere behind her eyes. She watched Cal come through the door. She watched Sarge follow. Then she looked at the dog for a long moment, the way people sometimes did when they were trying to place a face they hadn't seen in years. "You're the one who got the mill," she said. Not a question. "Word travels," Cal said. "This is Wilkes County." She pulled a can of soup off the shelf behind her without looking. "Word doesn't travel. It's just already everywhere." She set the can on the counter and looked at Sarge again. That dog was Danny's. Cal went still. "I know that dog," she said. "Danny brought him in here once, maybe 2015, said he was exercising him. I said that dog doesn't need exercise. That dog needs a mission." She paused. Danny laughed. He didn't laugh much. Cal set his bag down on the floor. "You knew Danny?" "Not well. Well enough." She started moving it around the counter with the slow efficiency of someone who had learned not to waste steps. She pulled down a second can without being asked. Beans, the good kind, and a box of crackers, a jar of peanut butter, setting them on the counter one by one. He paid his taxes on time, and he didn't bother anyone, and he came in here every few months for supplies. That's more than I can say for most." Cal watched her work. "He lived out there? At the mill?" "Lived's a strong word. He stayed there. There's a difference." She looked up. "You have somewhere else to go?" "No." "Then I suppose you'll find out what the difference is." She pushed the small pile of groceries toward him. "You've got another mile and a half before dark. You'll want to move." Cal reached for his wallet. She waved her hand. "Pay me when you come back through. You'll be back through." She looked at Sarge one more time. The dog was sitting beside Cal's boot, watching her with the unhurried attention he gave to most people. Not suspicious, not friendly, simply observant. She nodded at him once, the way you might nod at someone you respected. "He knows where he's going," she said. "Trust the dog." The last mile and a half was unpaved road, then a track through second-growth timber, then a clearing where the land opened up without warning, and the mill was simply there. Stone walls rising out of the October grass like something the earth had pushed up from below. Cal stopped walking. It was not what he had expected. He was not sure what he had expected. Something collapsed, maybe. Something you would look at and immediately understand why it had been given away. But the walls were thick fieldstone, dry stacked and then mortared. The kind of construction that did not negotiate with weather. 3 stories. The wheel housing on the north side had lost its paddles to rot, but the iron axle was still in place, still attached to the main shaft inside. The building itself had the permanent quality of landscape. It was not falling down. It had simply been waiting. The sugarloaf maple beside the east wall was already turning. Red at the tips, orange toward the center, still green at the base, the whole season compressed into one tree. Sarge walked past Cal and through the open doorway without slowing down. Cal followed him in. The interior smelled like stone and old wood and something else, something that Cal could not identify immediately. Not rot, not damp exactly, something older than either. He stood in the main room and let his eyes adjust to the light coming through 2 narrow windows, and he thought, Danny was in this room. Danny stood where I am standing. Danny looked at these same walls. The thought landed strangely, not like grief, like something else he did not have a word for. Marcus Webb arrived the next morning at 8:45. Cal heard the car before he saw it. A rental, something expensive and quiet, the kind that cost enough that the engine noise was considered a design problem. He was sitting on the stone step outside the east door with a cup of instant coffee when the car pulled into the clearing. The man who got out was wearing a navy suit that had no business being within 40 miles of a dirt road. He was perhaps 50, trim, with the kind of careful haircut that required a specific barber in a specific city. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm. He smiled at Cal with the practiced warmth of someone who smiled at strangers for a living. Sarge, who had been lying in the grass beside Cal's step, did not stand up. He turned his head and looked at the man. His ears moved forward. His body did not move at all. "Mr. Merritt," the man said. He crossed the clearing with the confident stride of someone used to arriving in places where his arrival was expected. "Marcus Webb, I represent Meridian Property Partners out of Charlotte." He extended his hand. Cal shook it. "You move fast." "We like to move before a property sits too long." Webb looked up at the mill walls with the neutral assessment of someone pricing something. Beautiful stonework. You don't see construction like this anymore. He said it the way people say things they do not actually mean. "We'd like to make you a serious offer, Mr. Merritt. $340,000 for the property and the surrounding acreage. Clean title transfer, no contingencies, close in 30 days. Cal looked at him over his coffee cup. "That's a lot of money for a broken mill." "We see potential where others see problems." Webb smiled again. His eyes moved to Sarge. The smile stayed in place, but something shifted behind it. A small recalculation, like a man adjusting his footing on uncertain ground. We'd need an answer within 48 hours. There are other parcels we're evaluating in the county. I just got here yesterday. I understand, but opportunities like this? I'll think about it, Cal said. Webb left his card on the step, pressed it down carefully with 2 fingers, as if making sure it would not blow away. He walked back to his car with the same confident stride, got in, and drove back down the track without looking in his mirror. Sarge watched the car until it disappeared into the trees. Then he looked at Cal. "Yeah," Cal said. "I know." He picked up Webb's card, looked at it for a moment, set it inside on the windowsill where he could see it. 48 hours. That afternoon, Frank Dooley appeared at the property line, a man in his 60s, with the weathered permanence of someone who had farmed the same land his whole life and intended to finish dying there. He did not come onto the property. He stood at the fence line and talked across it, which Cal understood immediately as a specific kind of boundary setting that had nothing to do with hostility. "You the one who got the mill," Dooley said. Same phrasing as Ruth, same absence of question mark. "That's right." Dooley looked at the building for a long moment. "No electricity, no running water. Roof's been compromised in the northeast corner since '09, and that's before you get to the foundation on the creek side." He paused. Danny Pruitt was a strange man. I don't mean that unkindly, but leaving this to somebody who doesn't know the land is a strange decision. "Maybe," Cal said. "You planning to sell to that Webb fellow?" Cal looked at him. "You know Webb?" "He's been through here twice in the last year, looking at properties along the creek bed." Dooley's eyes moved to the dry creek, the pale line of smooth stones that ran along the south edge of the property. "There's nothing along that creek worth $300,000, he said. "Nothing you can see, anyway." He said it flatly, without drama, like a man stating a fact he had been sitting with for a while. Then he nodded once and walked back toward his own land without saying goodbye, which was also, Cal understood, a specific kind of communication. The first 2 nights, Cal slept in his bag on the main floor, and Sarge slept beside him, and nothing happened except the ordinary sounds of an old building settling into the cold. Wood contracting, stone exhaling the last of the day's warmth, something small moving in the rafters that was not worth worrying about. Cal did not sleep well. This was not unusual. He had not slept well in 15 years. He lay in the dark and listened to the building and thought about Dooley's last words. "Nothing you can see, anyway." The phrasing had the weight of something deliberate. A man who farmed the same land for 40 years did not use words carelessly. He said what he meant, and he meant what he left unsaid just as precisely. There was something under the dry creek bed, something Webb knew about and Dooley suspected, and Danny had known for certain. Cal turned onto his side. Sarge's breathing was slow and even 6 inches from his face, the deep respiratory rhythm of a large dog in deep sleep, and Cal focused on that sound the way he had learned to focus on it over 15 years. As an anchor, as a point of return when his mind wanted to drift somewhere he could not afford to go. He slept, finally, around 3 in the morning, light and shallow, the way he always slept. On the 3rd night, Sarge woke him at 2, not by sound, by absence of sound, the absence of his breathing, which Cal registered before he was fully conscious, because 15 years of sleeping beside this dog had calibrated him to its rhythms more precisely than any alarm. He opened his eyes. Sarge was standing in the middle of the room, not facing the door, not facing the windows, facing the northeast corner, where the floor was oldest. Wide-planked oak gone dark with age, the boards fitted together with the tight carpentry of men who had expected their work to last. His nose was low, not to the floor, hovering just above it, moving in slow arcs, reading something in the air that had no name in any human language. Cal sat up. "Sarge." The dog did not look at him. He took 3 steps toward the corner and stopped. His tail was level. Not raised, not lowered. His ears were forward. Then he did something Cal had seen him do exactly twice before in 15 years, both times in places where something important was buried. He sat down, pressed both front paws flat against the floor, and went completely still, waiting. Cal got up. He crossed the room in the dark, not bothering with the flashlight yet, navigating by the faint moonlight coming through the east window. He crouched beside Sarge and put his hand on the floor. The boards here were the same as everywhere else. Wide oak, smooth with age, fitted close. He pressed along the seams with his fingers, the way he had once pressed along walls looking for tripwires. Systematic, without hurry, 1 inch at a time. He found it at the third board from the wall. A seam that was not a seam, a gap too uniform to be settling, too straight to be accidental. Approximately 18 inches long, running parallel to the wall, with a second perpendicular cut that formed a rough rectangle, roughly 2 feet by 3. A hatch, no handle, no hardware of any kind visible on the surface. But when Cal pressed down on the far edge, the near edge rose, counterweighted, fitted so precisely that the gap had been invisible until you were looking for it with your hands. He got the flashlight. The hatch lifted on a hidden piano hinge, swinging up and back to rest against the wall. Below it, a space roughly the depth of a man's arm, lined in the same oak planking as the floor above, bone dry in the way that only intentional waterproofing produces. Someone had taken care with this. Someone had thought about what they were preserving, and for how long. Inside, wrapped in waxed canvas and tied with kitchen twine, were 3 books. Not large books, each one perhaps 200 pages, bound in dark green leather with no title on the spine. Cal lifted the package out and set it on the floor beside him. The waxed canvas was stiff but intact. He untied the twine carefully, the way you handle something someone else handled last, and opened the canvas flat. 3 journals, identical binding, same dark green, the leather worn differently on each. The first barely touched, the second softened with handling, the third almost black, where a thumb had rested thousands of times against the lower right corner. Cal picked up the first one and opened it to the front page. Danny's handwriting. He recognized it immediately. The tight, economical print of someone who had been trained to write clearly under difficult conditions. No wasted strokes. Every letter standing upright and separate, like soldiers in a loose formation. November 14th, 2009. The date hit Cal the way cold water hits. Sudden, total, no preparation. He sat back on his heels. November 14th, 2009 was the day of the ambush. The day Danny's radio went quiet. The day Cal had sat for 4 hours listening to a frequency that returned nothing. The day Cal's guilt had started and had not stopped since. He looked at the page for a long time without reading further. The date was enough. The date was the whole weight of 15 years sitting there in Danny's careful handwriting, patient as stone, waiting for Cal to be ready. Sarge moved. He crossed the 3 feet between them and sat down directly in front of Cal, not beside him, in front of him, blocking his line of sight to the journal. He looked at Cal's face with the focused attention he reserved for moments when Cal was in danger of going somewhere he could not follow. Cal looked at the dog. The silver around Sarge's muzzle was almost white in the flashlight. His eyes were steady. He did not look away. "Okay," Cal said. His voice came out lower than he intended. "Okay." He closed the journal, set it carefully on top of the others, folded the waxed canvas back around them, not because he was done, he was nowhere near done, but because some things needed to be approached with daylight. Some things needed to be approached when you were sitting in a chair instead of crouching on a floor in the dark at 2 a.m. He put the package on the windowsill where he would see it when he woke up, where it could not be missed, could not be accidentally treated as something ordinary. Then he sat back down on his sleeping bag, and Sarge came and pressed against his side, heavy and warm, and Cal put one hand on the dog's flank without thinking about it. The ribs rose and fell. The heartbeat was there under his palm, slower than a human heart, steadier, more patient. Outside, the dry creek bed caught a piece of moonlight and held it. Cal looked at the journals on the windowsill and thought about a man who had been 26 years old on November 14, 2009, and what that man had thought was worth writing down on the worst night of his life, and whether whatever he had written down was something Cal was ready to know. He thought about Webb's card on the other windowsill. 48 hours from yesterday morning. He thought about what Dooley had said. Nothing you can see, anyway. He thought about Ruth, who had looked at Sarge and said, without explanation, "Trust the dog." And then he stopped thinking, because Sarge had gone back to sleep against his side, and the building was settling around them, and the moonlight on the dry creek was still and silver, and looked, from this angle, almost like water. He started reading at first light. He made instant coffee on the camp stove and sat in the one chair the mill contained, a wooden ladder back that Danny had left against the east wall, positioned to catch morning light through the narrow window. And he opened the first journal. Sarge lay at his feet and did not move for 3 hours. Danny wrote the way he had talked, short sentences, no decoration, the kind of prose that came from a man who had spent years writing situation reports and had never entirely left that habit behind. But underneath the economy of the language was something Cal had not expected, precision of a different kind. Not tactical precision, emotional precision, the specific, unsparing accuracy of a man who had decided, for whatever reason, to tell the truth to a page he expected no one to read. The first journal began on November 14, 2009, and it did not begin with the ambush. It began with the hour before it. Danny had written about the light, the particular quality of Afghan morning light at that altitude, which he described as the color of old brass, like everything is already a memory before it happens. He wrote about the smell of the truck they were riding in, and the sound of Sarge's breathing from the cargo area, and a conversation he'd had with Cal the previous evening about a diner in Fayetteville that made biscuits worth driving 4 hours for. Then the ambush came in Danny's account, the way it had come in reality, without announcement, without dramatic build-up. One moment the road was empty, the next it was not. Danny wrote about it in 43 words. He had counted the words without meaning to, reading it 3 times. 43 words for something that had taken 4 hours of Cal's life and 15 years of his sleep. Danny described it with the flat factuality of a man filing a report on weather he had not chosen. Position of fire, number of shooters estimated, Cal's order to pull back, Danny's own decision in the following 6 seconds. "I made a different call," he wrote, "not because Cal's order was wrong. It wasn't. I went back because Sarge was still in the truck and the truck was going to burn, and I wasn't leaving him. I want that on record somewhere, even if nobody ever reads it. It wasn't heroics. It was just math. The dog was there. I went back." Cal read that paragraph 4 times. He had spent 15 years believing Danny had died because of Cal's order, because Cal had pulled the team back and left Danny exposed. He had built the entire architecture of his guilt on that foundation. The order, the withdrawal, the radio going quiet. And it had never once occurred to him that Danny had made his own separate choice in the seconds that followed. That Danny had turned back not because of Cal, but because of Sarge. Because a 26-year-old Army Ranger had done the math on a burning truck and a dog, and decided the math came out one specific way. It wasn't heroics, it was just math. Cal set the journal down on his knee and looked out the window for a long time. The second journal started in a place Danny did not name. A room. A concrete room with a small window set high in the wall that showed a rectangle of sky that was sometimes blue and sometimes gray, and occasionally, in what Danny estimated, were the spring months, briefly green at the edges where something was growing outside the wall. He had been a prisoner for 7 months by the time he started the second journal. He had found a pen and a blank book in a guard's coat pocket during a transfer. He did not explain how. And he had started writing because he said, "I need to put things somewhere outside my own head, or I will lose track of what's real." The second journal was harder to read. Not because of what Danny described. He described very little of the physical reality of his captivity with the same 43-word economy he had applied to the ambush. What he described instead was the interior, the way time moved differently when there was no structure to it. The way Sarge kept appearing in his dreams, always young, always at the beginning of their training together, before either of them had learned what the work actually cost. The way he thought about people. He thought about Cal most, not with resentment, not with the kind of blame that would have been, Cal understood reading it, a form of relief, something to be angry at, a place to put the weight. Danny wrote about Cal the way you write about someone you have decided to protect from information that would hurt them and not help them, carefully, from a distance, with the considered love of someone who has thought through all the alternatives and arrived at a choice he intends to keep. He'll be carrying the radio, Danny wrote, in an entry dated, by his estimation, sometime in the spring of 2010. He always carries it. Even when there's nothing to listen for, he'll be carrying it and listening. That's Cal. He doesn't give up on a frequency just because it's gone quiet. I used to think that was stubbornness. Now I think it's just how he's built. Some people are built for holding on. I need him to stop holding this one. I need him to put the radio down. Cal's hands were not entirely steady on the page. He was aware, distantly, that Marcus Webb's 48-hour deadline was running. He was aware that outside the mill, the October day was moving through its ordinary business. Light shifting, temperature dropping, the dry creek bed sitting pale and silent in the grass. He was aware of all of it, and none of it mattered. He turned the page. The flashback came without warning, the way they always did, not summoned, not preceded by any signal he had learned to recognize in 15 years of watching for them. One moment he was reading. The next moment he was somewhere else entirely. November 14th, 2009, the radio in his hand, the frequency open and empty, the specific sound of a channel that has stopped receiving, not silence, because silence is the absence of sound, and this was something different. This was the presence of a frequency with nothing on it. A door standing open into a dark room. Danny, come in. Danny, nothing. Pruitt, respond. Nothing. The sound of his own breathing in the headset. The sound of the other men around him not speaking because there was nothing to say. The sound of time passing in increments that felt like physical weight. He did not know he was on the floor of the mill until he felt Sarge's weight against his chest. The dog had not barked, had not put his paws up. He had simply moved, crossed the distance between the chair and wherever Cal had ended up, and pressed his full body against Cal's chest with the steady, unapologetic weight of something that had been trained for exactly this and had never stopped being ready for it. His chin was on Cal's shoulder. His breathing was slow and even, 6 inches from Cal's ear, the same rhythm Cal had used to fall asleep for 15 years. Real, specific. Here. Cal put both arms around the dog and held on. He did not know how long they stayed like that. Long enough for the quality of the light through the window to shift. Long enough for the cold coming up through the stone floor to work its way through his jacket. Long enough for the frequency in his head to go quiet. Not empty the way it had been that night, but quiet the way things go quiet when they have finally said what they needed to say. He was crying. He noticed this the way you notice weather, without judgment, without surprise, as information about conditions rather than a statement about character. His face was wet and his chest hurt, and Sarge had not moved. "I didn't know," Cal said. His voice came out wrecked and insufficient. "Danny, I didn't know you went back for him." Sarge pressed closer. "I didn't know," Cal said again, to Danny, who was not there, to himself, who had needed to say it out loud to a room in order to believe it. "I thought it was my order. I thought you died because of my order." The mill held the words the way stone holds cold, completely, without judgment, for as long as necessary. Outside, nothing moved. Cal stayed on the floor with his arms around his old dog until his breathing steadied, and then he sat up slowly and picked up the second journal and found his place and kept reading. Because there was still a third journal. Because Danny had written it for a reason. Because a man who had spent 14 months in a concrete room and come home to a stone mill in North Carolina and lived there quietly for 12 more years and died in March had been trying to tell him something. And Cal intended to hear all of it. He owed Danny that much. He owed Danny that, at least. The third journal was the thinnest of the three. Danny had started it in January of 2023, 2 months after the diagnosis. His handwriting in this one was slightly different, the same tight print, but with occasional letters that pressed harder into the page, as if the hand was compensating for something the body was losing. He wrote in it almost every day. Short entries, the kind a man writes when he is aware of a deadline and has decided to use the time well. The first entry was one sentence. I have been trying to find Cal for 3 years, and I think I am running out of road, so I am going to write this down instead and hope the dog leads him to it. Cal read that sentence and set the journal on his knee and looked at the ceiling for a while. Then he kept reading. Danny had returned to the United States in November of 2011, 14 months after the ambush. He had been repatriated through official channels, not celebrated, not publicized, processed with the bureaucratic quietness that the military applied to situations it preferred not to explain. He had been debriefed for 3 weeks at a facility he was not permitted to name in writing, by men whose rank he described only as high enough that I understood immediately what the conversation was actually about. What the conversation was about was a man named Colonel Richard Harwell. Danny had witnessed something during his captivity, not during the ambush, but in the weeks before it. A weapons transaction, specific materiel, moving through specific hands, facilitated by an American officer whose face Danny had seen clearly and whose name he had known from briefings. Harwell had been running a private arrangement for 18 months by Danny's estimation, and when Danny had reported what he saw to his immediate superior, his superior had told him, with careful specificity, to forget it. 2 weeks later, the ambush had happened on a route that Danny had reported through official channels. He could not prove the connection. He had written that clearly, in the direct language of a man who had thought about it for years and arrived at the same uncertainty every time. He could not prove it, but he had made a decision in that concrete room, listening to the rectangle of sky change color through the seasons, that he was going to stay quiet for as long as Harwell was operational. Because if Danny surfaced, Harwell would move to protect himself. And the men most likely to be used in that protection were the men in Cal's unit. I made a choice, he wrote. I don't know if it was right. I know it was the only one I could make with what I had. I chose the people I could actually protect over the justice I couldn't actually guarantee. If Cal is reading this, I need him to know that choice had nothing to do with him not looking hard enough or not being worth coming back to. I stayed away because I was trying to keep him alive. That's the whole of it. Harwell had retired in 2019, died of a stroke in 2021. The reason I stayed away is gone, Danny wrote. And now I am the one who is going, and the timing is what it is. And I find this genuinely funny in a way I do not have the energy to explain. Cal read that line and made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. The last pages of the third journal were about the mill. Danny had bought it in 2014 with money he had saved working as a night watchman at a lumber yard outside Wilkesboro. He had chosen it because it was cheap and because of the creek. Not the surface creek, the dry bed of smooth stones that had not carried water in 20 years. The creek below it. He had discovered the underground spring in his second winter there when a section of the creek bed had collapsed inward during a hard frost, revealing a void below, a limestone cavity with clean water moving through it, steady and cold and entirely invisible from the surface. He had spent 3 summers mapping it by hand, dropping lines, measuring flow. What he had found was not a trickle. It was a genuine aquifer, not large by industrial standards, but large enough to supply. By his careful estimation, several hundred acres of land with clean water indefinitely. He had not told anyone. "Not because I was protecting it for myself," he wrote. "I don't need it for myself. I'm not going to be here. I'm leaving it for whoever comes after, which I intend to be Cal. And I'm leaving it because this county has been losing groundwater to agricultural runoff for 30 years, and nobody with money has been interested in fixing that problem, because there is no money in fixing it. There is money in owning the solution to it. I don't want anyone to own this. I want it to belong to the land and to the people who live on it, and I need someone stubborn enough to hold that line against people who will offer a great deal of money to move it. Cal is the most stubborn person I have ever known. That is the whole reason I'm leaving it to him." The final entry was dated February 28, 2023, 3 days before Danny died. It was 4 sentences. "Tell Sarge he was worth it. Tell him I said so, out loud, where he can hear you. He won't understand the words, but he'll understand the tone. He always did." Cal sat with the closed journal in his hands for a long time. Then he stood up, put on his jacket, and walked out to Ruth Abernathy's store. She listened to all of it without interrupting. Cal sat across from her at the small table she kept in the back of the store for her own lunch, and he told her about the journals, and about Harwell, and about the aquifer, and she listened with the steady attention of a woman who had been collecting information about this county for 71 years and knew how to hold a new piece without dropping the ones she already had. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The Webb fellow is after the water," she said. It was not a question. "The water and the mineral rights above it. He's got a resort project 12 miles north that needs a clean source." Cal set the third journal on the table between them. "Danny mapped the whole thing. Flow rate, volume, seasonal variation. It's all in here." Ruth looked at the journal without touching it. "What do you need?" "A phone, and the name of whoever covers land and water rights for the county paper." She looked at him steadily. "His name is Pete Garver. He's 32, and he thinks he's going to cover state politics someday, and he's been stuck writing about zoning board meetings for 4 years. She paused. "He will absolutely answer his phone." She pushed her landline across the table. Webb arrived with his lawyer at 9 the following morning, 1 hour before his deadline expired. Cal was sitting on the stone step again. Ruth was beside him, which Webb had not expected. He looked at her once with the rapid recalculation of a man adjusting to unexpected variables. Sarge was at Cal's feet. Frank Dooley was leaning against the fence line 30 yards away with his arms crossed, not speaking, simply present. Webb's lawyer was a woman in her 40s with a briefcase and the brisk efficiency of someone billing by the hour. She began outlining the terms of the offer before Webb had finished crossing the clearing. Cal waited until she finished. "I'm not selling," he said. Webb's smile remained in place with some effort. "Mr. Merritt, I want to make sure you understand the full scope of what we're—" "I understand the full scope," Cal said. "You want the aquifer, the limestone formation under the creek bed. Danny Pruitt mapped it over 3 summers and documented the flow rate and volume in detail." He watched Webb's expression. "Pete Garver at the county paper has a copy of that documentation as of this morning. He's also got a summary of the property surveys your company commissioned without disclosing their findings to the county assessor's office." The lawyer looked at Webb. Something passed between them that was not language. "The land stays," Cal said. "The water stays. That's the end of the conversation." Webb held the smile for 3 more seconds. Then it went away cleanly, like a light being switched off. And underneath it was just a tired man in an expensive suit, standing in a field that was not going to be what he needed it to be. He nodded once, turned, walked back to his car. The lawyer followed without looking back. Cal watched the car until it reached the tree line. Sarge watched it too, ears forward, body still, tracking with the focused patience of an animal that does not relax until the thing it has been monitoring is genuinely gone. The car disappeared. Sarge looked at Cal. One slow tail wag. That was all. Ruth put her hand briefly on Cal's arm and then took it away, which was the right amount. Frank Dooley pushed himself off the fence and walked back toward his land without saying anything, which was also, Cal had come to understand, the right amount. Tommy Pruitt drove up from Statesville on a Saturday in late November, 3 weeks after Webb's car disappeared into the tree line. He was 28 years old and had his father's build, the same economy of movement, the same way of occupying a space without filling it unnecessarily. He drove a pickup that had seen better decades and parked it at the edge of the clearing with the careful precision of someone who had spent years parking in tight spots at loading docks. He sat in the cab for a moment before getting out, looking at the mill through the windshield. Cal stood on the step and waited. Sarge sat beside Cal and watched the truck. Tommy got out and walked across the clearing with his hands in his jacket pockets. He stopped 10 feet from Cal and looked at the stone walls, the fieldstone construction, the iron axle still in its housing, the sugarloaf maple that had dropped all its leaves now and stood bare against the gray November sky. "He never told me about this place," Tommy said. His voice was even. "I didn't know he was in North Carolina." "I know," Cal said. "I'm sorry." Tommy looked at him. He had his father's eyes, too, the same particular stillness, the quality of someone who processed things internally before allowing them to appear on his face. "Pete Garver's article ran Wednesday," he said, "about the aquifer, about Webb. I saw it. He mentioned the journals." Tommy looked back at the mill. "He didn't quote from them, but he mentioned them." "I asked him not to quote from them," Cal said. "The water story is public. The rest of it belongs to your family." Tommy was quiet for a moment. A crow moved through the bare branches of the maple and kept going. "Can I read them?" Tommy asked. "They're yours," Cal said. "They were always yours. I was just the one who needed to find them first." They sat inside at the table Cal had built from 2 sawhorses and a piece of salvaged pine. The first thing he had built in the mill in the first week, because he needed somewhere to eat and somewhere to put the journals, and a table solved both problems at once. Tommy read for 2 hours. Cal made coffee and then went outside and split firewood because it needed doing and because some things a man needed to read alone. Sarge stayed inside with Tommy. Cal could see them through the window when he came back for the axe. The young man bent over the green leather journals, and the old dog lying 6 inches from his boot, with his chin on the floor, eyes half closed, breathing in the slow rhythm of deep rest. Cal went back to the wood. When Tommy came out, his eyes were red at the rims, but his face was steady. He stood beside Cal and looked at the dry creek bed for a while. The late November light was thin and horizontal, the kind that showed every stone individually, every hollow between them. "He was trying to protect you," Tommy said, "from the Harwell situation, you specifically." "Yes?" "He thought if he surfaced, they'd come after people in your unit." "That's what he wrote." Tommy put his hands in his pockets again. "He was right, probably. Harwell was that kind of man." He paused. "I looked him up after the article. He died in 2021. Stroke." "I know." "So by the time Dad was dying, the reason he stayed away was already gone, and he was trying to find you for 3 years." "Yes." Tommy looked at the creek bed. "Diane Whitfield told me about the 3 years." His jaw worked once, then was still. "I keep thinking about that. 3 years. He was 40 minutes from Statesville, and he was trying to find you for 3 years so he could tell you it wasn't your fault." Cal did not say anything. There was nothing to say that the silence didn't already hold. "Was it?" Tommy asked. "Your fault?" Cal thought about 43 words in a green journal. He thought about a 26-year-old man doing math on a burning truck and a dog and arriving at a number that only ever had one answer for him. "No," Cal said. "It wasn't." Tommy nodded. Once. The way his father had nodded, Cal understood. The economy of a gesture that contained more than it showed. They stood there until the light started failing, 2 men and a dog in a building that had been holding this particular truth in its oak floor for long enough. Spring came to Wilkes County the way it always did in the mountains, reluctantly, in fits, with cold nights persisting into April as if the season was not entirely convinced yet. The creek ran in March. Not the surface creek. That was still dry stone, still pale in the grass. The underground water began expressing itself at the south edge of the property, seeping up through a low point in the limestone where the water table had always been closest to the surface. It came quietly, without announcement. One morning Cal walked out, and the grass at the property's edge was wet. And by afternoon there was a thin, bright line of moving water working its way south through the field toward the lower pasture. Frank Dooley saw it from his fence line and did not say anything for a long moment. Then he walked to his barn and came back with a hand pump, old but functional, and set it beside the wet grass without asking permission or offering explanation. The pump had been cleaned and oiled recently. Its handle moved easily. Cal looked at it, looked at Dooley. "Belonged to my grandfather," Dooley said. "Been sitting in the barn 30 years. Figured it was time it did something." He walked back to his land. Cal watched him go. On a Tuesday in April, Cal sat on the stone step in the morning sun with his second cup of coffee and the county paper, which Pete Garber had started leaving in the mailbox at the road without being asked. The aquifer story had run 3 more follow-up pieces. The county water board had opened a formal assessment. Webb's company had withdrawn its interest in the region entirely, which the paper reported in 4 paragraphs and which Cal read once and set aside. Sarge was at the creek. He had taken to going there in the mornings, walking down from the mill at his own pace, the slight hitch in his left rear leg more pronounced in the cold, but better in the sun, and settling himself beside the water that had come up through the limestone and was now running clear and steady along the south edge of the property. He was not chasing anything, not tracking anything. He lay in the grass with his chin 6 inches from the water's edge and let the sound of it run past him, and his eyes were half closed, and his breathing was the slow, deep rhythm of an old dog in morning sun who had nowhere else to be and knew it. Cal watched him from the step. The sugarloaf maple was budding, small tight points of green at every branch tip, the whole tree holding its breath before it opened. The stone walls of the mill behind him were warm already, holding the April sun the way they had held cold all winter, indifferent to seasons, patient with time. He thought about Danny writing, "I need him to stop holding this one. I need him to put the radio down." He thought about Tommy reading those words at a salvaged pine table and coming out with steady eyes and asking the only question that mattered. He picked up his coffee cup and looked at the creek. Sarge lifted his muzzle from the grass, not toward Cal, toward the water, nose just above the surface, reading whatever the moving water carried in it, the information of distance and stone and the long, dark underground passage that had brought it here. His tail moved once, slow and unhurried, brushing the grass on either side. Then he set his chin back down. The water ran on. Some missions don't end when the fighting stops. Some missions wait in a locked hatch under an oak floor for the right person and the right dog to finish them. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you believe the truth is worth holding on to, even for 15 years, even in a concrete room, even in silence, leave a comment below. We've got more stories coming, and every one of them starts with a dog who already knows the way.